Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer, known as the Milwaukee Cannibal, became one of the most infamous serial killers in American history. His reign of terror, which lasted from 1978 to 1991, shocked the world not only for the brutality of his crimes, but also for the apparent normalcy of his outward life. Born on May 21, 1960 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Dahmer grew up in a middle-class family, with no obvious signs of the monster he would become. Dahmer's childhood, though seemingly ordinary at first glance, was marked by subtle disturbances that, in retrospect, can be seen as precursors to his future depravity. The son of a chemist and a teletype machine instructor, Jeffrey faced family instability caused by frequent moves and his parents' eventual divorce. This emotional turbulence, combined with a growing sense of social isolation, planted the seeds of his future pathology. From an early age, Dahmer demonstrated a morbid fascination with death and animal anatomy. What began as a childish curiosity about dead insects evolved into more disturbing experiments with animal carcasses. These early signs of behavioral deviation went largely unnoticed or were downplayed by those around him, an oversight that would have tragic consequences. As Dahmer entered adolescence, his emerging sexuality became intertwined with his violent tendencies. Struggling with his homosexuality in a time and environment that stigmatized such orientations, he began to have fantasies that mixed sexual desire with domination and death. Alcohol, which would become a constant companion in his adult life, began to play a significant role in his escape from reality. Dahmer's first murder in 1978 marked the beginning of a series of crimes that would span more than a decade. His victims, predominantly young men from ethnic minorities, were lured to his apartment with promises of money or companionship. Once there, they faced an unimaginable fate: drugging, strangulation, dismemberment, and in some cases, cannibalism. What makes the Dahmer case particularly disturbing is the duality of his existence. On the outside, he maintained a facade of normalcy, working at a chocolate factory and living an apparently ordinary life. This ability to blend into society, combined with the reluctance of authorities to thoroughly investigate the disappearance of young men, especially those from marginalized communities, allowed Dahmer to continue his killing spree for years undetected. As we explore the life and crimes of Jeffrey Dahmer, we are confronted not only with the horror of his acts, but also with broader questions about the society that produced him and failed to stop him. His case sheds light on the failures in the criminal justice system, the social prejudices that allowed his victims to be overlooked, and the complex interaction between mental illness, trauma, and evil. This documentary aims to examine Jeffrey Dahmer's life thoroughly, from his seemingly normal childhood to his years as a serial killer and his eventual capture. Through interviews with investigators, forensic psychologists, victims, family members, and those who knew Dahmer, we will seek to understand what led an apparently ordinary man to become one of the most notorious killers in American history. Throughout this narrative, we will explore each of his known victims, giving them a voice and humanity that Dahmer denied them in life. We will examine the social and cultural context of the time, which allowed his crimes to go unnoticed for so long. Finally, we will analyze the lasting impact the Dahmer case has had on American society, law enforcement, and the understanding of criminal psychopathology. Victim 1, Stephen Mark Hicks. Stephen Mark Hicks, an 18-year-old from Coventry Township, Lyon, Ohio, was Jeffrey Dahmer's first known victim. Hicks was a blonde and blue-eyed young man described by friends as charismatic and adventurous. Freshly graduated from high school, Stephen was eager to explore the world beyond his small town. On June 18, 1978, Hicks was hitchhiking to a rock concert at Chippewa Lake Park, Ohio, when Dahmer, also 18 at the time, spotted him on the roadside. Dahmer offered Hicks a ride, inviting him to drink at his house. Stephen, attracted by the prospect of free drinks and company, accepted the offer without suspecting the danger that awaited him. At Dahmer's parents' house, the two young men drank and talked. When Hicks expressed his desire to leave, Dahmer, fearing loneliness, attacked him with a dumbbell, hitting him on the head and strangling him to death. This act marked the beginning of Dahmer's homicidal career. Hick's autopsy, conducted years later when his remains were finally discovered, revealed skull fractures consistent with a blunt force blow and neck markings indicative of strangulation. The bones showed signs of post-mortem dismemberment, consistent with Dahmer's account of dissecting the body. The final identification was made through dental records and DNA analysis. Victim 2, Stephen Walter Tuomi. Stephen Tuomi, 25, was a young artist and cook of Finnish-American descent from Ontonagon, Michigan. Described as gentle and creative by friends and family, Tuomi had recently moved to Milwaukee in search of better job opportunities. On September 20th, 1987, Tuomi met Dahmer at a gay bar called Club 219. Dahmer, claiming he didn't have enough money for his own room, convinced Tuomi to share a room at the Ambassador Hotel. This was the last time Stephen was seen alive. The next morning, Dahmer woke up to find Tuomi's beaten body beside him. Although Dahmer claimed not to remember killing Tuomi, he admitted to disposing of the body. This murder marked the end of Dahmer's 9-year hiatus and the beginning of a series of homicides that would last until his capture. Due to Dahmer's complete disposal of the body, a formal autopsy was never performed on Stephen Tuomi. His death was reconstructed only through Dahmer's confession. The lack of physical evidence in this case highlights Dahmer's ability to conceal his crimes, a factor that contributed to his ability to continue killing for so long without being detected. Victim 3, James Edward Doxtator. James Doxtator was a young Native American, only 14 years old when he encountered Jeffrey Dahmer. Born into a family from the Oneida tribe, James had run away from home due to family problems and was living on the streets of Milwaukee, occasionally resorting to prostitution to survive. On January 16, 1988, Dahmer approached Doxtator near Club 219, a gay bar he frequented regularly. Dahmer offered James $50 to pose for photos at his apartment. The young man, desperately in need of money, accepted the offer without hesitation. Once in the apartment, Dahmer drugged Doxtator with sedatives mixed into a drink. When James became unconscious, Dahmer strangled him to death. In the days that followed, he dismembered the body, keeping the skull as a macabre trophy. The autopsy of Doxtator's remains, conducted after Dahmer's capture, revealed fractures in the hyoid bone, consistent with strangulation. Toxicological analysis of the few remaining tissues indicated the presence of sedatives. The advanced state of decomposition and Dahmer's methods of disposing of the body made it impossible to determine if sexual abuse had occurred before death. The final identification was made through dental records and DNA comparison with family members. James Doxtator's case is particularly tragic due to his age and vulnerability. His death highlights how Dahmer often targeted marginalized youth, whose disappearances were less likely to generate intensive investigations by authorities. Victim 4, Richard Guerrero. Richard Guerrero, a 22-year-old Hispanic man, was known for his vibrant personality and contagious smile. Born and raised in Milwaukee, Richard worked temporary jobs and occasionally frequented the city's gay nightlife scene. He was the oldest of 6 siblings and deeply loved by his family. On March 24, 1988, Guerrero encountered Dahmer at a local gay bar. Dahmer, using his usual tactic, offered Richard money to accompany him to his apartment and pose for photos. Guerrero, who was going through financial difficulties, accepted the offer. At the apartment, Dahmer followed his established pattern. He drugged Guerrero with sedatives mixed into a drink and then strangled him to death. In the days that followed, Dahmer dismembered Richard's body and disposed of most of the remains, keeping only the skull. The autopsy of Guerrero's remains, conducted after Dahmer's arrest, revealed fractures in the hyoid bone and laryngeal cartilage, consistent with manual strangulation. Traces of sedatives were found in the few remaining tissues. The advanced state of decomposition prevented the determination of ante-mortem sexual abuse. Known for his good looks and charisma, Anthony worked as a bartender in Milwaukee while pursuing his dreams in the entertainment industry. He was openly gay and popular in the local LGBTQ+ community. On March 25, 1989, Sears met Dahmer at La Cage, a popular gay nightclub in Milwaukee. Dahmer, attracted to Anthony's appearance, invited him to his apartment with the promise of a photo shoot that could help his modeling career. Once in the apartment, the familiar pattern repeated itself. Dahmer drugged Sears with drinks laced with sedatives and then strangled him. After death, Dahmer not only dismembered the body but also decided to preserve Anthony's skull and genitals, marking an escalation in his morbid behavior. The autopsy of Sears' remains, conducted after Dahmer's capture, revealed clear signs of strangulation, including fractures in the hyoid bone and petechiae in the eyes. Toxicological analysis detected high levels of sedatives. The state of preservation of the remains allowed investigators to conclude that there had been post-mortem sexual activity. The identification was confirmed through dental records and DNA comparison. Anthony Sears' case is significant in Dahmer's criminal trajectory, as it marks the beginning of his practice of preserving parts of his victims' bodies, a behavior that would intensify over time. Victim 6, Raymond Lamont Smith, also known as Ricky Beeks. Raymond Smith, 32, was a construction worker and occasional prostitute. Known among friends as Ricky Beeks, Smith was the father of a young child and struggled to balance his personal life with his financial difficulties. On May 20, 1990, Dahmer met Smith at a gay bar and offered him $50 to accompany him to his apartment. Smith, in need of money, accepted the offer without suspecting the danger that awaited him. At the apartment, Dahmer followed his established modus operandi, drugging Smith with a drink laced with sedatives. However, this time, Dahmer injected a drug cocktail directly into Smith's neck, causing his death. After the murder, Dahmer dismembered the body and preserved the skull, which he painted gray in a macabre attempt at decoration. The autopsy of Smith's remains, conducted after Dahmer's arrest, revealed traces of multiple drugs in his tissues, consistent with the induced overdose. Examination of the preserved skull showed signs of blunt trauma, suggesting that Dahmer may have used physical force in addition to the overdose. The identification was confirmed through dental records and DNA comparison with family members. Raymond Smith's case is notable for marking a shift in Dahmer's methods, demonstrating an escalation in his boldness and experimentation with different ways of killing. Additionally, the preservation and decoration of the skull indicate a deepening of the ritual and fetishistic aspects of Dahmer's crimes. Victim 7, Edward W. Smith. Edward W. Smith, 27, was an African-American man known for his charisma and sense of humor. He worked as a security guard at a local nightclub and was well loved by his friends and colleagues. Edward had plans to return to school and dreamed of becoming a successful businessman. On June 24, 1990, Smith met Dahmer at a gay bar in downtown Milwaukee. Dahmer, using his usual tactic, offered Edward money to accompany him to his apartment and pose for photos. Smith, who was experiencing financial difficulties, accepted the offer. At the apartment, Dahmer followed his established pattern. He drugged Smith with sedatives mixed into a drink and then strangled him to death. After the murder, Dahmer dismembered the body and preserved parts, including the skull and hands. The autopsy of Smith's remains, conducted after Dahmer's arrest, revealed fractures in the hyoid bone and laryngeal cartilage, consistent with manual strangulation. Traces of sedatives were found in the remaining tissues. Analysis of the bones of the hands indicated that Dahmer had used acid in an attempt to remove the fingerprints. The identification was confirmed through dental records and DNA comparison with family members. Edward Smith's case is particularly notable for Dahmer's attempt to hinder the victim's identification, demonstrating a growing sophistication in his methods of concealing crimes. Victim 8, Ernest Miller. Ernest Miller, 22, was an aspiring professional dancer. Born in Chicago, Miller had moved to Milwaukee in search of opportunities in the city's art scene. He was known for his grace on stage and his gentle spirit off it. On September 2, 1990, Miller encountered Dahmer near a shopping center. Dahmer offered Ernest money to pose for photos at his apartment. Attracted by the prospect of earning some extra money for his dance classes, Miller accepted the offer. At the apartment, Dahmer deviated from his usual pattern. Instead of drugging Miller, he attacked him directly, slitting his throat. After the death, Dahmer not only dismembered the body but also decided to experiment with cannibalism for the first time, consuming parts of Miller's body. The autopsy of Miller's remains, conducted after Dahmer's capture, revealed deep cuts in the neck, consistent with the use of a sharp knife. Analysis of the bones showed human bite marks, corroborating Dahmer's confession about cannibalism. Dahmer had preserved Miller's heart in the freezer, which was later found by the police. The identification was confirmed through dental records and DNA comparison. Ernest Miller's case marks a significant escalation in Dahmer's crimes, introducing the element of cannibalism that would become a horrific feature of his subsequent murders. Victim 9. David C. Thomas. David C. Thomas, 22, was a young single father who worked at a local factory. Described by friends as gentle and dedicated, David struggled to balance his work with caring for his young child. He occasionally frequented gay bars, still exploring his sexuality. On September 24, 1990, Thomas met Dahmer at a gay bar in downtown Milwaukee. Dahmer, using his usual approach, offered David money to accompany him to his apartment and pose for photos. Thomas, seeing an opportunity to earn some extra money to help with his child's expenses, accepted the offer. At the apartment, Dahmer drugged Thomas with sedatives mixed into a drink. This time, however, Dahmer experimented with his fantasy of creating a sexual zombie, drilling into Thomas's skull and injecting hydrochloric acid into his brain. When the experiment failed and Thomas began to show signs of recovery, Dahmer strangled him to death. The autopsy of Thomas's remains, conducted after Dahmer's arrest, revealed extensive damage to the skull and brain tissue, consistent with the drilling and acid injection. Fractures in the hyoid bone confirmed strangulation as the final cause of death. Traces of sedatives were found in the remaining tissues. The identification was confirmed through dental records and DNA comparison with family members. David Thomas's case is particularly disturbing, as it demonstrates the escalation of Dahmer's perverse fantasies and his willingness to inflict prolonged suffering on his victims. Additionally, the fact that Thomas was a father adds an extra layer of tragedy to the crime, leaving a child orphaned. Victim 10. Curtis Straughter. Curtis Straughter, 17, was a high school student known for his vibrant personality and talent in art. Born and raised in Milwaukee, Curtis faced difficulties at home and occasionally engaged in sex work to survive. On February 18, 1991, Straughter met Dahmer at the bus stop near Marquette University. Dahmer offered Curtis money to pose for photos at his apartment. The young man, in need of money and unsuspecting of the danger, accepted the offer. At the apartment, Dahmer followed his established pattern. He drugged Straughter with sedatives mixed into a drink and then strangled him to death. After the murder, Dahmer not only dismembered the body, but also preserved the skull and other parts for his macabre collection. The autopsy of Straughter's remains, conducted after Dahmer's arrest, revealed fractures in the hyoid bone and laryngeal cartilage, consistent with manual strangulation. Traces of sedatives were found in the remaining tissues. Analysis of the preserved skull showed signs of post-mortem drilling, indicating Dahmer had experimented with the body after death. The identification was confirmed through dental records and DNA comparison with family members. Curtis Straughter's case is particularly tragic due to his age and vulnerability. His death highlights how Dahmer often targeted young people in precarious situations, exploiting their financial needs and lack of stable social connections. Victim 11. Errol Lindsay. Errol Lindsay, 19, was a young African-American known for his warm smile and helpful nature. He worked temporary jobs and dreamed of opening his own business one day. Errol was heterosexual, making him an atypical victim for Dahmer. On April 7, 1991, Lindsay encountered Dahmer by chance on the street. Adapting his approach, Dahmer offered Errol money to help him move some furniture in his apartment. Lindsay, always willing to help and earn extra money, accepted the offer without suspecting the danger. At the apartment, Dahmer drugged Lindsay with a sedative-laced drink. In a disturbing escalation of his fantasies, Dahmer attempted to create a permanent sexual zombie by drilling into Lindsay's skull and injecting hydrochloric acid into his brain while he was still alive. When Lindsay woke up and complained of a headache, Dahmer drugged him again and strangled him to death. The autopsy of Lindsay's remains, conducted after Dahmer's arrest, revealed extensive damage to the skull and brain tissue, consistent with drilling and acid injection. Fractures in the hyoid bone confirmed strangulation as the final cause of death. High levels of sedatives were found in the remaining tissues. The identification was confirmed through dental records and DNA comparison with family members. Errol Lindsay's case is particularly shocking due to the prolonged and torturous nature of his suffering. Additionally, Lindsay being heterosexual demonstrates how Dahmer was becoming bolder and less selective in his victim choices. Victim 12, Tony Hughes. Tony Hughes, 31, was a deaf and mute man who worked as a model. Despite his disabilities, Tony was known for his vibrant personality and determination to live a full life. He communicated primarily through sign language and writing. On May 24, 1991, Hughes met Dahmer at a gay bar. Due to his condition, they communicated through writing. Dahmer, using his usual tactic, offered Tony money to pose for photos at his apartment. Hughes, always seeking modeling opportunities, accepted the offer. At the apartment, Dahmer drugged Hughes with sedative-laced drinks. Due to his hearing impairment, Tony might not have noticed any suspicious sounds that could have alerted him to danger. Dahmer then strangled him to death. After the murder, Dahmer dismembered the body and preserved parts, including the skull. The autopsy of Hughes's remains, conducted after Dahmer's arrest, revealed fractures in the hyoid bone and laryngeal cartilage, consistent with manual strangulation. Traces of sedatives were found in the remaining tissues. Analysis of the preserved skull showed signs of post-mortem manipulation. The identification was confirmed through dental records and DNA comparison with family members. Tony Hughes's case is particularly poignant due to his additional vulnerability as a person with a disability. His death highlights how Dahmer often targeted marginalized or vulnerable individuals, exploiting their unique circumstances to commit his heinous crimes. Victim 13, Konarak Synthesomphone. Konarak Synthesomphone, 14, was a young Laotian whose family had immigrated to the United States as refugees. Described as a dedicated student and a loving son, Konarak worked part-time jobs to help his family. On May 26, 1991, Synthesomphone encountered Dahmer on the street. Exploiting Konarak's youth and vulnerability, Dahmer offered him money to pose for photos at his apartment. The young boy, unsuspecting of the danger and attracted by the prospect of earning money, accepted the offer. At the apartment, Dahmer drugged Synthesomphone and, in a repeat of his previous attempt to create a sexual zombie, drilled into the boy's skull and injected hydrochloric acid into his brain. Remarkably, Konarak managed to escape the apartment and was found by neighbors who called the police. However, in one of the most controversial episodes of the case, Dahmer convinced the arriving officers that Synthesomphone was his intoxicated adult boyfriend, and the police returned the disoriented boy to Dahmer's care. Shortly thereafter, Dahmer killed Konarak. The autopsy of Synthesomphone's remains, conducted after Dahmer's arrest, revealed extensive damage to the skull and brain tissue, consistent with drilling and acid injection. Fractures in the hyoid bone confirmed strangulation as the final cause of death. The identification was confirmed through dental records and DNA comparison with family members. Konarak Synthesomphone's case is particularly tragic and controversial, highlighting significant failures in the policing system and societal prejudices that allowed Dahmer to continue his crimes. Victim 14, Matt Turner, also known as Donald Goki. Matt Turner, 20, was a young man from Chicago working as a prostitute. Known among friends as Donald Goki, Turner was described as charismatic and hopeful, with plans to leave prostitution and pursue a career in the fashion industry. On June 30, 1991, Turner met Dahmer at the Chicago Pride Parade. Dahmer, who had traveled specifically looking for a victim, offered Turner money to accompany him to Milwaukee and pose for photos. Seeing an opportunity to earn a significant amount, Turner accepted the offer. At the apartment in Milwaukee, Dahmer followed his established pattern. He drugged Turner with sedatives mixed into a drink and then strangled him to death. After the murder, Dahmer dismembered the body and preserved parts, including the skull. The autopsy of Turner's remains, conducted after Dahmer's arrest, revealed fractures in the hyoid bone and laryngeal cartilage consistent with manual strangulation. Traces of sedatives were found in the remaining tissues. Analysis of the preserved skull showed signs of post-mortem manipulation. The identification was confirmed through dental records and DNA comparison with family members. Matt Turner's case is notable for demonstrating how Dahmer was willing to travel to find victims, expanding his range beyond Milwaukee. Victim 15. Jeremiah Weinberger. Jeremiah Weinberger, 23, was a Hispanic young man from Puerto Rico who worked as a healthcare aide in Chicago. Described by friends as kind and caring, Jeremiah had a passion for music and dreamed of becoming a professional DJ. On July 5, 1991, Weinberger met Dahmer at a gay bar in Chicago. Dahmer, again on a trip to find victims, convinced Jeremiah to accompany him to Milwaukee with promises of a better life and job opportunities. At the apartment in Milwaukee, Dahmer drugged Weinberger and, escalating his cruelty, drilled into Jeremiah's skull and injected boiling water into his brain. Weinberger fell into a coma and died 2 days later. After the death, Dahmer dismembered the body and preserved parts. The autopsy of Weinberger's remains, conducted after Dahmer's arrest, revealed extensive damage to the skull and brain tissue consistent with drilling and the injection of boiling water. The final cause of death was determined to be severe brain damage. The identification was confirmed through dental records and DNA comparison with family members. Jeremiah Weinberger's case is particularly disturbing due to the prolonged and torturous nature of his suffering, demonstrating the escalation of Dahmer's cruelty in his later crimes. Victim 16. Oliver Lacey. Oliver Lacey, 24, was a young African-American who worked as a personal trainer. Known for his dedication to fitness and his athletic physique, Oliver was admired by his clients and friends for his discipline and charisma. On July 15, 1991, Lacey met Dahmer in a bookstore. Dahmer, impressed by Oliver's physique, offered him money to pose for photos at his apartment. Lacey, who occasionally did fitness modeling, accepted the offer. At the apartment, Dahmer drugged Lacey with a sedative-laced drink and then strangled him to death. After the murder, Dahmer not only dismembered the body but also kept Lacey's heart in the freezer, planning to eat it later. The autopsy of Lacey's remains, conducted after Dahmer's arrest, revealed fractures in the hyoid bone and laryngeal cartilage, consistent with manual strangulation. Traces of sedatives were found in the remaining tissues. The preserved heart in the freezer was identified as belonging to Lacey. The identification was confirmed through dental records and DNA comparison with family members. Oliver Lacey's case highlights Dahmer's fixation with preserving body parts and his growing interest in cannibalism, marking a final escalation in his crimes before his capture. Victim 17. Joseph Breithoft. Joseph Breithoft, 25, was the last known victim of Jeffrey Dahmer. Breithoft was a father of 3 from Minnesota who had recently arrived in Milwaukee searching for work. Described as a quiet and hardworking man, Joseph was struggling to support his family. On July 19, 1991, Breithoft met Dahmer on the street. Dahmer, using his usual tactic, offered Joseph money to accompany him to his apartment and pose for photos. Breithoft, desperate for any opportunity to earn money, accepted the offer. At the apartment, Dahmer followed his established pattern. He drugged Breithoft with a sedative-laced drink and then strangled him to death. After the murder, Dahmer kept Joseph's body in his bed for 2 days before dismembering it. The autopsy of Breithoft's remains, conducted after Dahmer's arrest, revealed fractures in the hyoid bone and laryngeal cartilage, consistent with manual strangulation. Traces of sedatives were found in the remaining tissues. The advanced decomposition of the body indicated it had been kept for several days before dismemberment. The identification was confirmed through dental records and DNA comparison with family members. Joseph Breithoft's case is particularly tragic for being the last victim before Dahmer's capture, a life lost just 3 days before the end of the serial killer's reign of terror. For many of Jeffrey Dahmer's neighbors at the Oxford Apartments on North 25th Street in Milwaukee, he was simply another ordinary resident. Often described as quiet and reserved, Dahmer rarely drew attention to himself. Pamela Bass, a neighbor who lived on the same floor, remembered him as a polite man who occasionally offered sandwiches to neighbors, a gesture that, in retrospect, took on a terrifyingly sinister meaning. He was always very polite, Bass recalled in later interviews. We would never have suspected that something so horrible was happening right next door. This perception of Dahmer as a normal and even helpful neighbor was shared by many in the building, illustrating his ability to maintain a facade of normalcy. However, not all aspects of Dahmer's life went completely unnoticed. Some neighbors reported strange odors coming from his apartment, especially during the summer months. Cynthia Slater, a resident of the building, mentioned in later statements, "Sometimes there was a terrible smell coming from his apartment. It was like rotting meat. We thought maybe he had left food to spoil." Other residents noticed the constant flow of young men entering and leaving Dahmer's apartment, usually late at night. While this raised some eyebrows, at the time it was largely attributed to his sexual orientation and the fact that the building was located in an area known for its gay nightlife. One of the most disturbing incidents occurred in May 1991, when neighbors found a young Laotian boy, Konerak Sintha Somphone, naked and disoriented in the alley beside the building. Despite the intervention of some women who called the police, Dahmer managed to convince the officers that the boy was his intoxicated adult boyfriend. Sandra Smith, one of the women who tried to help Sintha Somphone, recalled, "We tried to tell the police that something was wrong, that the boy seemed to be scared, but they didn't listen to us." This tragic incident illustrates how warning signs were ignored or misinterpreted, allowing Dahmer to continue his crimes. The Oxford Apartments was known as a place where many residents kept to themselves. In a predominantly African-American neighborhood, Dahmer, being white, did not particularly stand out, but neither did he fully integrate. His tendency to drink excessively was noticed by some, but was not uncommon in the context of the building and the area. There was always a lot of movement in the building, people coming and going at all hours, recalled one former resident who preferred to remain anonymous. Dahmer didn't seem different from any other single resident. After the revelation of Dahmer's crimes, many neighbors expressed shock and guilt for not recognizing or acting on the subtle signs. Looking back, there were signs, reflected Pamela Bass. But who could imagine something so horrible? Dahmer's ability to live among ordinary people for so long, committing such heinous acts, raised unsettling questions about the nature of modern urban life and the social isolation that can allow monsters to hide in plain sight. The Dahmer case served as a grim reminder that sometimes evil can reside in the most ordinary places, hidden behind a facade of normalcy that deceives even those closest. The night that changed everything. July 22, 1991. On the hot and humid night of July 22, 1991, the streets of Milwaukee pulsed with the typical energy of a summer Monday. Bars and nightclubs were filled with people seeking to escape the heat and everyday worries. Among them was Tracy Edwards, a 32-year-old African-American man, who had no idea that he was about to become a central figure in one of the most notorious criminal cases of the 20th century. Edwards, wearing a colorful shirt and jeans, entered the Grand Avenue Mall, a shopping center in the heart of Milwaukee, around 11 p.m. There, in Court D, a popular meeting spot for the local gay community, he met Jeffrey Dahmer. Dahmer, a 31-year-old white man with thin framed glasses and well-combed brown hair, approached Edwards with a friendly smile and a tempting proposal. $100 to pose for some photos in his apartment, accompanied by a few beers. For Edwards, who was going through financial difficulties, the offer seemed too good to refuse. Dahmer took Edwards to the Oxford Apartments, a 3-story brick building on North 25th Street. Apartment 213, on the second floor, appeared perfectly normal at first glance. Simple furniture, some plants, and the soft hum of a ceiling fan created a seemingly harmless atmosphere. Dahmer, maintaining his facade of hospitality, offered a beer to Edwards and turned on the television. However, as the minutes passed, Edwards began to notice disturbing details. A strange, pervasive odor filled the air, masked by the strong smell of incense. On the coffee table lay a stack of gay pornography magazines, but what really alarmed Edwards was when Dahmer tried to handcuff him, claiming it was part of the photo session. Edwards' survival instincts kicked in. He managed to convince Dahmer to remove the handcuffs, arguing that he would feel more comfortable if they could drink and talk first. Dahmer reluctantly agreed, but the atmosphere in the apartment grew increasingly tense. Edwards noticed that Dahmer seemed to be rocking back and forth, murmuring to himself. While Dahmer was distracted, Edwards made a terrifying discovery: a large butcher knife under the bed. At that moment, he realized he was in mortal danger. With his heart racing and adrenaline coursing through his veins, Edwards devised a plan to escape. He suggested that they go to a bar to have more drinks, hoping to get out of the apartment. Dahmer, however, had other plans. He approached Edwards with a menacing look, holding the knife. In a moment of desperation, Edwards summoned all his strength and delivered a powerful punch to Dahmer's face. The blow took Dahmer by surprise, giving Edwards the chance he needed. With one of the handcuffs still attached to his wrist, Edwards bolted for the door, briefly struggling with Dahmer before managing to open it. He dashed down the hallway and raced down the stairs, the sound of his footsteps echoing through the silent building. Once on the street, Edwards ran desperately, looking over his shoulder to see if he was being followed. Around midnight, officers Robert Routh and Rolf Muller were on their routine patrol when they spotted Edwards running down the street, visibly distressed with a handcuff dangling from his wrist. They stopped the patrol car and approached Edwards, who, breathless and in a panic, recounted his unbelievable story about a crazy man who had tried to attack him. Initially skeptical, the officers were convinced by Edwards' evident distress and the handcuff on his wrist. They decided to investigate, asking Edwards to lead them back to Dahmer's apartment. Arriving at the Oxford Apartments, officers Routh and Miller, accompanied by Edwards, climbed the stairs to the second floor. The hallway was quiet, lit only by a dim light. When they knocked on the door of apartment 213, they were greeted by a surprisingly calm and cooperative Jeffrey Dahmer. Dahmer, wearing only a pair of shorts, invited the officers inside. The apartment was impeccably clean, with no obvious signs of the confrontation described by Edwards. Dahmer explained that he had had a disagreement with Edwards but insisted it was all a misunderstanding. While Officer Routh questioned Dahmer in the living room, Officer Muller decided to take a look in the bedroom. It was then that he made the discovery that would change everything. On the dresser, Muller found several explicit Polaroid photos depicting dismembered human bodies in various grotesque poses. "These are real," Muller exclaimed, showing the photos to his partner. Dahmer's face instantly changed, shifting from calm to panic. He tried to run for the door, but was quickly subdued by the two officers. With Dahmer immobilized, the police began a more detailed search of the apartment. What they found went beyond their worst nightmares. In the refrigerator, they discovered a freshly decapitated human head. The freezer contained 3 more heads and several human organs. In a large blue drum in the corner of the room, they found partially decomposed torsos soaking in acid. The smell that Edwards had noticed earlier became unbearable as more evidence was uncovered. The officers, struggling against nausea and horror, called for backup. Within minutes, apartment 213 was filled with police officers, investigators, and forensic teams. Confronted with irrefutable evidence of his crimes, Dahmer offered no resistance. He was taken into custody and transported to the Milwaukee Central Station. During the subsequent interrogation, which lasted over 60 hours, Dahmer gave a full and detailed confession of his crimes. "I created this horror and now only I can face it," Dahmer reportedly told investigators, his monotone voice contrasting with the horror of his words. He meticulously described each of his murders, including details on how he selected his victims, lured them to his apartment, and the methods he used to kill them and dispose of the bodies. Dahmer's confession revealed the shocking extent of his crimes: 17 murders over 13 years. with most occurring in the last 3 years in Milwaukee. He admitted not only to murder but also to necrophilia and cannibalism, describing how he preserved and sometimes consumed parts of his victims' bodies. News of Dahmer's capture and the nature of his crimes spread like wildfire through Milwaukee, and soon across the country. Reporters and onlookers gathered in front of the Oxford apartments, turning the once anonymous building into a morbid point of interest. Dahmer's neighbors, many of whom had interacted with him over the years, were in a state of shock. Pamela Bass, a neighbor who had occasionally accepted sandwiches offered by Dahmer, expressed horror at the thought of what she might have consumed. "He seemed so normal," she repeated to reporters, her voice trembling with disbelief. As more details of Dahmer's crimes emerged, the city of Milwaukee found itself at the center of an unprecedented media storm. Journalists from around the world converged on the city, each new revelation adding another layer to the already incomprehensible horror. The capture of Jeffrey Dahmer not only ended his series of murders but also opened a Pandora's box of questions about police failures, social prejudices, and the nature of evil in our society. The Dahmer case would become one of the most notorious in American criminal history, leaving an indelible mark on the collective psyche and prompting profound changes in policing practices and social awareness. In the weeks following Dahmer's capture, Milwaukee found itself at the center of an unprecedented media storm. Journalists from around the world converged on the city, turning the Oxford apartments into a macabre tourist attraction. The building, once anonymous, became a grim symbol of the horror that had unfolded within its walls. Television cameras broadcasted live images as forensic teams continued to remove evidence from apartment 213, each new item discovered adding another layer to the already incomprehensible horror. The local community, especially the residents of the neighborhood where Dahmer lived, was deeply affected. Many expressed a mixture of shock, guilt, and anger. Vigils were organized in memory of the victims, with candles illuminating the sidewalks where Dahmer once walked. Community leaders and activists demanded answers, questioning how so many young people, primarily from ethnic minorities and the LGBTQ+ community, could disappear without drawing greater attention from authorities. For the families of Dahmer's victims, the capture brought a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. There was relief from finally knowing what had happened to their loved ones, but also renewed pain when confronted with the horrific details of their last moments. Many families expressed frustration with the police, feeling that more could have been done to find their missing sons, brothers, and friends. Catherine Lacey, sister of Oliver Lacey, one of Dahmer's last victims, expressed the sentiment of many when she said, "It's not just about Oliver. It's about all these young lives that were cut short. They were people with dreams, with families who loved them, and the system failed them all." The families of the victims banded together, forming support groups and advocating for changes in policing practices. Their voices became crucial in the ensuing public debate, humanizing the victims who, for too long, had been reduced to statistics in police reports. The Dahmer case prompted a profound reckoning within Milwaukee's institutions, particularly the police department. The revelation that officers had returned a disoriented and injured Konarak Synthasom phone to Dahmer's care months before the killer's capture led to an internal investigation and the dismissal of the officers involved. Police Chief Philip Areola faced intense public scrutiny and political pressure. In a tense press conference, he admitted, "Mistakes were made. We are committed to a complete review of our procedures and training to ensure that something like this never happens again." The failures exposed by the Dahmer case led to significant changes in policing practices, not only in Milwaukee but across police departments nationwide. New guidelines were implemented for dealing with vulnerable individuals and investigating disappearances, especially those involving minorities and members of the LGBTQ+ community. The Milwaukee Cannibal case left an indelible mark on the American collective psyche. It became a cultural touchstone for extreme evil, mentioned in countless films, television shows, and songs. More importantly, the case sparked important discussions on topics such as urban loneliness, social alienation, and the dangers of institutional prejudice. Scholars and psychologists dedicated years to studying the case, seeking to understand how someone could commit such heinous acts while living a seemingly normal life. Dr. Park Dietz, a renowned forensic psychiatrist who interviewed Dahmer extensively, observed, "The Dahmer case forces us to confront the limits of what we consider human. It challenges our notions of sanity and madness, normality and monstrosity." In the years that followed, Milwaukee worked hard to free itself from Jeffrey Dahmer's shadow. The Oxford apartments were demolished, and a small park was built on the site in memory of the victims. Annually, on the anniversary of Dahmer's capture, residents gathered to remember the lost lives and reaffirm their commitment to a more vigilant and compassionate community. The case also had a lasting impact on how society views and treats marginalized individuals. LGBTQ+ and minority rights organizations used the case to highlight the vulnerabilities faced by these communities and push for greater protection and representation. Decades after his capture, the name Jeffrey Dahmer still evokes a collective shiver. His case remains a grim reminder of the monsters that can hide in plain sight and the tragic consequences when society fails to protect its most vulnerable members. The legacy of the Dahmer case is complex and multifaceted. On the one hand, it exposed deep flaws in our institutions and social fabric. On the other, it served as a catalyst for positive changes, from improved policing practices to a heightened awareness of social justice issues. As Milwaukee and the rest of the world move forward, the lessons of the Dahmer case remain relevant. They remind us of the importance of community vigilance, empathy for the marginalized, and the constant need to question our biases and assumptions. The Dahmer case, in all its horror and tragedy, continues to be a powerful reminder that true evil can exist in the most common places, and that the responsibility to combat it rests with all of us. The trial of Jeffrey Dahmer began on January 30, 1992, in the Milwaukee County Courthouse, attracting unprecedented international attention. The courtroom was packed daily with victims, family members, journalists, and a horrified yet fascinated public. Judge Lawrence C. Graham Jr. presided over what many called the trial of the century. Dahmer was charged with 15 counts of first-degree murder in Wisconsin. The murder of Stephen Hicks, committed in Ohio, would be handled separately. The defense strategy, led by attorney Gerald Boyle, was to plead insanity. Boyle argued that only someone completely insane could commit such heinous acts. The prosecution, on the other hand, painted Dahmer as a calculating killer in full control of his actions. District Attorney E. Michael McCann presented meticulous evidence, including Dahmer's detailed confessions and the horrifying findings in his apartment. One of the most impactful moments of the trial occurred when photographs of Dahmer's victims were shown to the jury. Many jurors were visibly disturbed, some openly weeping. The victims' families, present in the courtroom, had to be escorted out due to the emotional intensity of the moment. Dahmer surprised everyone when it against his attorney's advice. He decided to make a final statement to the court. In a 20-minute speech, he expressed remorse for his actions, saying, "I never wanted freedom. Frankly, I wanted death for myself." He added that his obsession with control and fear of abandonment had led him to commit these terrible acts. After 2 weeks of testimonies and deliberations, the jury rejected the insanity plea on February 15, 1992. Dahmer was found guilty of all 15 counts of first-degree murder. During the sentencing phase, victims' family members had the opportunity to address Dahmer in the court. Their emotional statements highlighted the devastating impact of Dahmer's crimes on their lives. Rita Isbell, sister of Errol Lindsay, became famous for her passionate testimony, during which she screamed and attempted to lunge at Dahmer, having to be restrained by court officers. Judge Graham sentenced Dahmer to 15 consecutive life sentences, plus 10 years for each, totaling 957 years in prison. In practice, this meant that Dahmer would never have the possibility of parole. Dahmer was initially incarcerated at Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin. Due to the notorious nature of his crimes, he was kept in solitary confinement for his own safety during the first year. Surprisingly, Dahmer seemed to adapt well to prison life. He became religious, being baptized in May 1994. The prison chaplain, Roy Ratcliffe, who performed the baptism, reported that Dahmer appeared sincere in his quest for redemption. However, Dahmer's life in prison would be short. On November 28, 1994, just 2.5 years after his conviction, Dahmer was attacked by a fellow inmate, Christopher Scarver, while performing cleaning duties. Scarver, armed with a metal bar from the prison gym, struck Dahmer in the head multiple times, causing fatal injuries. Dahmer was pronounced dead approximately an hour after arriving at the local hospital. The news of Dahmer's death provoked mixed reactions. Some victims' families expressed relief, feeling that justice had been served. Others lamented the loss of the opportunity to obtain more answers or to see Dahmer spend the rest of his life in prison